The village of Silent Plains sat where the earth cracked and the wind carried dust instead of rain. Its people lived cautiously, speaking in hushed voices whenever the shadows grew long, for they believed spirits lingered just beyond sight, listening. Homes were small mud dwellings that hunched together against the ceaseless wind, and the fields yielded little more than brittle stalks of millet. Hunger was a companion the villagers had grown accustomed to, and superstition was their shield against despair. In this weary place lived a girl named Nyara. She was slight, with dark, watchful eyes, and though her clothes were worn thin, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her mother had died many years before, leaving her in the care of her stepfather, Haroun. To the villagers, Haroun was a man of unsettling presence. His hands were always stained with ash and dirt, for he spent his nights in strange rituals, digging up bones from the earth or hanging skulls of animals in the branches of trees. He claimed these acts brought protection, but most whispered that he courted darker powers. Nyara endured his household with patience. From dawn to dusk, she fetched water from the distant well, tended the small patch of millet, and cared for the goats that were the family's only wealth. Despite her burdens, she found small ways to show kindness. She gave her neighbors' children sips of cool water when their throats were dry, mended torn clothes with nimble fingers, and offered her own portion of food to those hungrier than herself. These small acts made her beloved in the eyes of some, but they also stirred envy in Haroun, who despised the respect she quietly earned. The village itself regarded Nyara with a mixture of pity and admiration. Old women shook their heads when they saw her carrying heavy loads, muttering that her mother's spirit must surely weep. Young men admired her resolve, though none dared speak too openly, for Haroun's temper was sharp as a blade. Children, however, adored her most. They followed her down the dusty paths, begging for stories or songs, and she always obliged with a soft voice that carried above the sound of the wind. But Silent Plains was not a place where joy came easily. Hunger gnawed at bellies and strange omens troubled the nights. If a goat bleated at midnight, villagers crossed themselves and whispered of curses. If bones surfaced in the fields after a storm, they took it as a warning to work harder, lest the ancestors withdraw their favor. It was a land where fear guided decisions more than reason, and Haroun thrived in that fear. He fed it with his rituals, chanting by firelight, lifting skulls to the sky, and muttering that without his protection calamity would consume them all. Nyara's life was one of silence. She rarely spoke in defiance, for she knew it would bring only pain. Instead, she bore her stepfather's cruelty with endurance, her spirit quietly refusing to break. There were nights when she lay awake listening to the wind batter the walls, wondering if her mother's spirit could hear her prayers. She asked not for escape but for strength, to keep her heart kind in a place where cruelty reigned. This balance, her gentleness against Haroun's darkness, did not go unnoticed. The villagers whispered in secret, wondering how a girl so mistreated could still carry herself with light in her eyes. Some said she was protected by unseen forces. Others muttered that Haroun's house was cursed and that the girl's endurance was merely a mask hiding her suffering. But all agreed on one thing. Silent Plains was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and one day, such tension could not remain unbroken. For now, Nyara rose each morning to fetch water, to tend the goats, to mend and sew and sing softly to children. Haroun watched her with a shadowed gaze, bitterness curling tighter in his chest each time someone smiled at her or spoke well of her patience. The wind carried whispers through the cracked earth, and though no one yet knew it, a reckoning was stirring, a reckoning that would begin not with thunder from the sky, but with a skull, an act of cruelty, and the unseen judgment of the spirits that had always lingered in Silent Plains. Haroun had always carried bitterness in his bones, but in the years after Nyara's mother died, it hardened into cruelty. He regarded the girl not as a child under his care but as a burden tethered to his household. Every task, no matter how small, he placed on her shoulders. If water was needed from the distant well, he ordered her to fetch it, even in the burning sun or the bitter chill of night. If the goats wandered, he struck her for their disobedience, though she had done her best to tend them. His words were sharper than his blows, laced with scorn. "You are nothing without me," he spat one evening as she served him food. "Your mother left me this weight and I alone keep you alive. You owe me everything." Nyara never answered. She bowed her head, pressing her lips together, knowing any reply would draw worse punishment. Yet her silence was not weakness. It was a shield, thin but unbroken, and though Haroun mistook it for submission, it held a quiet defiance. The villagers often saw the evidence of his cruelty. They noticed the fresh blisters on her hands from carrying heavy pots, the bruises she tried to hide beneath her sleeves. Some pitied her but said little. Fear of Haroun kept their tongues still. He was not only a man of temper but one who toyed with bones and skulls, practices many considered dangerous. His rituals gave him an air of menace, and people preferred distance to confrontation. Yet behind closed doors, they whispered about Nyara's endurance, marveling that she had not collapsed under his weight. Envy played no small part in Haroun's growing malice. Though he controlled the girl's body with commands and punishments, he could not command the respect she received from others. Children laughed when she told them stories, elders nodded approvingly when she offered water or mended garments, and even strangers passing through silent plains remarked on her patience and grace. Every kind word toward Nyara was to Haroun an insult to his authority. Inheritance also fueled his bitterness. In silent plains, property rarely passed to women, but Nyara's mother had left behind a small dowry of jewelry and trinkets hidden away. Haroun claimed it as his, but whispers lingered that her mother had spoken before her death of passing it to Nyara when she came of age. Haroun, fearing the villagers might press him to honor her words, worked harder to diminish the girl's standing. If she were disgraced, if she were seen as cursed or unworthy, then no one would dare demand justice on her behalf. This fear of losing control gnawed at him, twisting his cruelty into obsession. He watched her with calculating eyes, waiting for moments to humiliate her. When she lingered too long at the well, he accused her of idleness. When she offered food to a hungry child, he scolded her for theft. When she sang softly while working, he struck her for daring to raise her voice above silence. Nyara bore it all, but inside her heart she held fast to a simple truth. Cruelty could touch her body but it could not claim her soul. Each insult, each blow she endured with the thought of her mother's voice, soft and clear in memory. Strength is not in striking back, child. Strength is in refusing to let the darkness make a home in you. Haroun, blinded by envy and the traditions that favored men's power over women's lives, could not see the quiet strength that grew within her. He believed he was bending her spirit into submission, yet in truth, every act of cruelty only deepened the villagers' sympathy for her. His obsession with control was isolating him. Where once people tolerated his presence, now they eyed him warily, uneasy not only with his rituals but with his treatment of the girl under his roof. Still, Haroun's pride would not allow him to relent. The more respect Nyara gathered in whispers and glances, the more determined he became to crush her light. In his heart, envy burned like a coal that could not be cooled. And so, night after night, as the wind howled across silent plains, he schemed of ways to disgrace her utterly, ways that would twist pity into mockery and respect into fear. Unbeknownst to him, each thought of malice was weaving its own trap, binding his fate tighter with every cruel intention. The spirits of silent plains, long patient watchers, stirred in the unseen places, listening. The Feast of Masks came once each year in silent plains, when the moon was high and the wind carried with it the smell of dry earth and ash. It was the only time the village dared to laugh loudly, to beat drums, and to dance through the night without fear that spirits might punish them. The elders taught that on this night, the ancestors walked among the living, wearing borrowed faces to remind their descendants of the thin veil between worlds. To honor them, every man, woman, and child crafted masks from what they could find: woven reeds, carved wood, painted clay, or bleached bone. Some masks were crude, with rough holes for eyes. Others were shaped with care, adorned with feathers, beads, and ash. The sight of the villagers parading in these disguises was eerie and beautiful all at once, a ritual born from reverence and fear. Nyara, as always, worked quietly in the days before the feast. She gathered reeds from the riverbed, fetched clay for her neighbors, and carried water to the women who mixed paints for their masks. Children begged her to tell them stories of spirits that might wear their masks to dance beside them. She told the tales with care, always ending with the reminder that kindness pleased the ancestors more than any mask, and cruelty was always seen, no matter how well hidden. The children listened with wide eyes, clutching their unfinished masks to their chests. But Haroun did not allow Nyara to prepare a mask for herself. He sneered whenever she lingered near the preparations. "The feast is for those worthy of being seen by the ancestors," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "You are nothing more than a shadow in my house. What spirit would claim your face?" His words stung, but Nyara bore them in silence. She had long learned that arguing only fanned his cruelty. On the night of the feast, the village was transformed. Fires blazed in every corner, painting the cracked earth with gold and red. Drums throbbed in steady rhythm, echoing against the dark hills. The villagers swirled in dances, their masks gleaming in the firelight. Laughter, rare and precious in silent plains, rang out like bells. Children darted through the crowd, their small masks wobbling on their faces, while elders chanted the names of ancestors long gone. The air shimmered with a strange energy, as if indeed the spirits had stepped down to walk among them. Nyara watched from the shadows of her stepfather's house, her heart aching. She longed to dance, to join the children's games, to feel for one night that she was part of the living, laughing world. But Haroun kept her away, sitting in the dim room with only the skulls he had strung up for company. He muttered incantations to them, words no one else dared to repeat. He despised the joy outside, despised that others had reason to honor one another while he sat brooding in his rituals. Yet more than that, he despised that even without a mask, people spoke kindly of Nyara, whispering of her patience, her gentleness, her endurance. As the night deepened, Haroun's envy twisted into a plan. He would not simply keep Nyara from the feast, he would use it to disgrace her. In his mind, her growing quiet respect among the villagers was a threat. They admired her strength, and he feared that admiration might one day grow into defiance against him. He needed a way to strip her of dignity, to make the community see her not as blessed but cursed. And what better night to achieve it than the feast, when every eye was open to omens, and every heart quickened at the thought of spirits walking close. When the dancing reached its height, Haroun stepped out among the villagers with a mask of his own, an unsettling thing fashioned from a goat's skull, its hollow socket staring, its horns curving like a crown of cruelty. The villagers drew back, uneasy at the sight, for though bone masks were not forbidden, few dared to wear them. Bones were reminders of death, of the thin line between living flesh and silent dust. To wear such a mask so brazenly was to mock the boundary between life and death. Some muttered that Haroun invited spirits too close, that he tempted judgment. But Haroun reveled in their unease. He lifted his voice above the drums, calling on the ancestors to witness the weakness under his roof. "A true curse lives with me," he shouted, gesturing toward the shadows where Nyara lingered. "A girl who is no blessing, only a burden. A spirit's pity might mask her shame, but I will show you her true face." His words cut through the music, stilling the laughter. Heads turned toward Nyara, and though many pitied her, none dared intervene. The feast was a time of omens, and no one wished to stand in the path of whatever ritual Haroun planned. Nyara's heart pounded. She felt the weight of every eye, every mask turned toward her. She wanted to run, to disappear into the darkness beyond the fires, but her feet held fast. Haroun's gaze burned with malice as he raised his goat skull mask high, already envisioning the ritual that would mark her forever. The drums slowed, voices hushed, and in that silence, the girl realized that her life was about to change, that Haroun's cruelty was no longer confined to whispers and shadows. Before all the village he meant to break her. But the spirits who hovered close on the night of masks had other intentions, waiting in the unseen places for the moment to reveal where true shame belonged. When the feast ended and the fires burned low, Haroun's envy had hardened into something crueler than words. The villagers drifted home, weary from dancing, masks tucked beneath their arms. Laughter lingered in the air, but inside Haroun's house, shadows thickened like a second skin. He had been watching Nyara all night, her quiet presence near the doorway, the way villagers glanced toward her with pity rather than contempt. To him, even pity was dangerous, an ember that could one day flare into respect, perhaps even protection. He wanted her shamed, silenced, erased from the whispers of silent plains. That night he called her to him. His voice was thick with the smoke of drink and fire, sharp as a blade. "Come closer," he demanded, holding the goat's skull in his hands. Its hollow sockets glared, its horns twisted upward as though mocking the sky. The skull still smelled faintly of ash from the fires of the feast. Nyara hesitated, her bare feet cold on the packed earth. "What do you want, father?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. "You will carry your true face," Haroun hissed, eyes gleaming with malice. "The world will see you for what you are, a curse, a burden, a thing fit only to wear the bones of beasts." Before she could step back, he lunged. With surprising strength, he pressed the skull down over her head. Its edges scraped her skin, its weight pressing against her crown. The horns loomed above her like a cruel crown of mockery. Haroun's laughter echoed in the small room, jagged and harsh. "Now they will know," he snarled. "Now you will walk as you were meant to, hidden, shamed, marked." He chanted words in a low, guttural rhythm, syllables borrowed from rituals he had pieced together from elders' mutterings and his own imaginings. The villagers whispered of his bone rights, but in truth, Haroun did not fully understand them. Still, his cruelty gave his voice a frightening power, and in that dim hut, it seemed as if shadows themselves bent toward him. Nyara gasped beneath the skull, the air hot and stifling. Her tears slid down her cheeks, unseen behind the hollow sockets. She tried to lift it away, but Haroun pressed it tighter. "It will not come off," he said, his words dripping with triumph. "Not until the spirits themselves decide you are clean, and they never will." Her cries echoed into the night, muffled by the bone, reaching no one but the wind. Outside, the village slept, dreaming of masks and ancestors, unaware that within Haroun's house, cruelty was shaping a curse that would soon rebound. For hours she sat with the skull heavy on her head, her breath shallow, her body trembling. She prayed in silence, her voice inward, calling not for rescue but for strength. "If the spirits see me, let them judge fairly. If I have walked with kindness, let it be known. If I must suffer, let my heart not break." Haroun, drunk on his own malice, left her sitting there and lay down to sleep. But the skull, heavy and restless, had other intentions. Its horns seemed to glow faintly in the dimness, and though Nyara closed her eyes in despair, something unseen stirred. The cruelty meant for her had been witnessed. The spirits, long silent, had listened. By dawn, the village would not see a girl cursed, but a man bound to his own malice, hands fused to the very skull he had meant to use as a weapon. And in that moment of darkness, Nyara's fate turned, though she did not yet know it. What Haroun believed to be the night of her shame was, in truth, the beginning of his undoing. The morning began with silence, but it was not the gentle silence of dawn birdsong or waking children. It was a heavy, unnatural stillness that pressed against the huts of silent plains. Nyara stirred on her mat, the goat skull still pressed cruelly against her head. She could feel its weight, but something had shifted. The pressure that had sealed it to her skin no longer pressed down. Her trembling fingers lifted it gently, and to her astonishment, it slid free as though it had never been bound to her at all. She stared at it in her hands, the hollow socket staring back. Its bone surface felt hot, not like an object of death but like something alive, pulsing faintly. Confused, she set it down beside her and wrapped her arms around her knees. For the first time in hours, her face was uncovered. The air on her skin was sharp and cool, like freedom itself. Across the room, Haroun stirred, grumbling in his sleep. Nyara froze, her body tense. Then she saw it. His hands were clenched tightly, but not in the way of an ordinary sleeper. The goat's skull was fused to him. Its bone surface melded into his palms as though his flesh had grown into it. He twitched, his face contorting as if in pain. When he awoke, he looked down and let out a strangled cry. He tried to shake it off, but the skull remained, its horns jutting upward from his grasp like cruel wings. His eyes widened, fear breaking through the armor of arrogance. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No, this is not for me." He slammed his hands against the ground, against the walls, trying to break free, but the bone would not release him. Each strike only sent a dull echo through the hut, a sound like drumbeats of doom. Nyara watched silently, her heart torn between fear and awe. She had prayed for strength, not revenge, yet here was something greater than she had dared imagine. The spirit's judgment, manifest in bone and horn. Haroun staggered to his feet, stumbling out into the early light. The villagers had begun to stir, and now they gathered, drawn by his cries. Their eyes widened as they saw him thrashing in the dust, his hands locked inside the goat's skull. The horns caught the sun, casting strange shadows across the earth. "What has he done?" someone whispered. Another murmured, "It is the curse of bones, the spirits have turned against him." Haroun glared at them all, desperation contorting his face. "Do not look at me. It was meant for her." He pointed a trembling, fused hand toward Nyara, who stood quietly in the doorway. The villagers turned their gaze from him to her. But where he was wild and broken, she stood calm, her face uncovered, her eyes steady despite her exhaustion. There was no skull on her head, no shame upon her shoulders. Only a strange glow of dignity that seemed to rise from her suffering. She was freed, an elder muttered. The spirits chose. Haroun roared in rage, tugging at the bone with all his might. The horns cut shallow grooves into his forearms, blood mingling with dust. Yet the skull remained unyielding, its hollow eyes now mocking him. By midday the whispers had become open words. Some said the curse had revealed his true heart, that his cruelty had finally bound him. Others spoke of Nyara's quiet prayers, her innocence shining so brightly the spirits themselves had shielded her. Haroun, exhausted, collapsed by the well, his chest heaving. His eyes found Nyara again, and for the first time in her memory she saw fear in him, not the fear of a man losing power, but the fear of one standing naked before truth. Nyara did not speak. She only met his gaze, her silence louder than any curse. And as the day stretched on, the villagers began to see a shift in their world. The man who had wielded cruelty now bore its weight in his very hands, while the girl he had sought to shame walked unburdened, her dignity intact. The goat's skull had refused her, but it clung to him with the grip of the unseen, reminding all who watched that injustice could not pass unmarked. That night when the fires burned low again, no one danced. They only whispered of the spirit's will, and of the girl who had been spared. The dawn after Haroun's humiliation spread slowly across the ashen plains, as if the sun itself hesitated to look upon the man with the skull fused to his hands. Word had spread overnight, traveling faster than wind through the grasses, carried on whispers between huts and murmurs at the wells. By the time morning drums sounded, every villager knew. Haroun, the man of authority and temper, was marked by the spirits. They gathered in the central clearing, not to celebrate or share food but to witness. Haroun had been dragged there by his own desperation, stumbling, sweat-soaked, his arms trembling beneath the weight of the horns. He knelt in the dust, clutching his cursed hands to his chest. The skull gleamed faintly even in daylight, its hollow socket staring at the villagers like a pair of merciless eyes. Nyara stood apart, her bare feet planted firmly on the earth. She had washed her face at dawn, and though shadows of exhaustion clung to her, there was a serenity about her that unsettled the crowd. A girl who should have been shamed, broken, or worse was standing tall, her eyes neither vengeful nor pleading. She seemed to carry the patience of stone itself. The elders arrived, their robes rustling, their staffs tapping against the packed ground. Elder Kofi, oldest of them all, raised a hand for silence. His voice, cracked but steady, carried across the clearing. Haroun, son of Dako, head of this household, what is it that clings to your hands? Haroun lifted them, the skull jutting outward, horns catching the light like sickles. A mistake, he rasped. A cruel trick. I placed it upon her head as she deserved, but the spirits twisted it against me. This is not justice, it is mockery. Murmurs rippled through the villagers. Some shook their heads, others narrowed their eyes. Elder Kofi turned to Nyara. Child, is this true? Did he seek to shame you? Nyara's voice was quiet but steady. Yes, Elder. He pressed the skull down upon me. He called me curse and burden. I prayed in silence, and when I awoke, the skull had slipped away from me and clung to him. She looked around, her eyes clear. I did not call for this. But the spirits answered as they chose. Her words carried no bitterness, and that lack of malice struck deeper than any accusation. The villagers looked from her to Haroun and back again, weighing truth against denial. Another elder, Amma, stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp, like fire behind smoke. Haroun, you have long held power in this village. Many have whispered of your harshness, your temper, your bone rights. Now the spirits themselves have placed their mark upon you. Do you deny that you sought to harm your own child? I sought only to teach her place. Haroun bellowed, desperation cracking his voice. She steals favor, she turns eyes away from me, she is no daughter of mine, she is a shadow meant to shame me. At his words, the skull pulsed faintly, a dull glow flickering within its sockets. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stepped back as though his rage itself might burn them. Elder Amma lifted her staff high. See how the bone responds. His lies feed it, his cruelty binds it tighter. This is not a daughter's curse, it is his own spirit devouring him. The villagers began to murmur louder now, voices rising with anger. He shamed her, he cursed her, he mocked the spirits. No leader of ours, shouted one man. Let the judgment fall, cried a woman, clutching her child close. Haroun, panting, tried to tear the skull free once more. Blood streaked down his wrists, but still the bone held fast. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for even a shred of pity. Yet none came. He who had commanded fear now knelt beneath it. Elder Kofi raised both hands, silencing the chaos. His gaze swept across the villagers, then returned to Haroun. This matter is no longer between man and child. It is between man and spirits. But the village must decide how to walk in its shadow. A debate began, fierce and heated. Some cried for exile, saying Haroun's presence would poison their fields. Others demanded he be bound and guarded, a living warning to any who would mock the spirits. A few, trembling with fear, whispered that mercy might ease the curse, though none dared speak too loudly in his defense. Through it all, Nyara stood quietly listening. Her silence unsettled even more than the shouting. Finally, Elder Amma turned to her. Child, the spirits have spared you and bound him. You have seen his cruelty and you have endured it. What say you, Nyara? Should he be cast out or kept as an example? Every eye turned to her. Haroun too looked up, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples. For the first time in his life he waited on her words. Nyara lifted her chin. It is not for me to command the spirits, she said softly. But I will not carry his shame on my shoulders. Let him answer for his own hands. Let the village decide. Her refusal to condemn him outright only deepened the sense of judgment. It was as though the spirits had given him over to the people, and she had stepped aside so that their will, not hers, would speak. The elders whispered together, then raised their staffs as one. Elder Kofi's voice rang out, "So it shall be. Haroun is bound by his own cruelty. He will walk no longer as a man of authority but as one marked by bone and horn. His punishment is not death but life, life with his shame visible to all, a warning carved into flesh." The villagers roared in agreement, some in anger, some in awe. Haroun collapsed to the ground, sobbing, the skull still fused to his bleeding hands. And Nyara, standing in the growing light of morning, felt the weight that had burdened her for years begin to lift. The judgment had not destroyed her, it had rebuilt her. And though her stepfather's curse clung to him like a second skin, she walked away free, the villagers' eyes following her not with pity but with reverence. Haroun did not sleep that night. He sat in the dust outside the elders' circle, his skull-bound hands twitching in the firelight as though possessed by something older than himself. The horns cast long, jagged shadows against the earth, and though the flames had burned low, it seemed as if the skull drew light into itself, glowing faintly even when no fire fed it. By morning the villagers were done with him. They would not kill him, the elders had decreed it, but neither would they allow him to remain among them. A man bound by bone cannot lead, cannot sow, cannot hunt, Elder Amma had declared. He will take his shadow with him, and he will learn what it is to wander with his shame. So it was that Haroun became an outcast. He left silent plains at dawn, stumbling into the open scrublands, his figure outlined against the rising sun. The villagers gathered to watch his departure in silence. Some spat into the dirt as he passed. Others whispered prayers, not for him but for protection, that his curse would not linger among them. Nyara stood in the back of the crowd. She did not call out, nor did she turn away. Her eyes followed him, steady and unreadable. She felt no triumph in his fall, only a strange hollow ache. He had tried to break her, yet it was his own spirit that had snapped. Now he was leaving, carrying the very curse he had meant for her. The journey into exile was harsh. Haroun's hands, bound into the skull, could not grasp water gourds, nor lift food easily. His once strong arms trembled from the effort of carrying even small bundles. When hunger gnawed at him, he had to kneel and claw at roots with the horns themselves, scraping the earth like an animal. The bone tore his skin raw, leaving trails of blood along his forearms. Worse still were the nights. When darkness fell and silence pressed down like a blanket, the skull began to hum. At first it was only faint, a low vibration that throbbed through his bones. But as the nights deepened, the hum grew into whispers. "You sought to shame her," the voices murmured. "You wore cruelty like a cloak and now it wears you. You belong to us." Haroun would thrash, beating his bound hands against stone, shouting into the emptiness. But the whispers never ceased. Sleep came only in fits, broken by nightmares of hollow eyes and gnashing teeth. He dreamed of Nyara standing calmly while the horns dragged him deeper into the earth. He would wake screaming only to find the skull still fused to him, heavier than before. Days stretched into weeks. His once proud shoulders sagged. His beard grew wild, his clothes ragged. Children from nearby villages sometimes spotted him wandering near the edges of fields. They would run back to their parents crying out about the horned man. Farmers muttered prayers and set charms at the edges of their land to ward him away. No fire welcomed him. No hand offered him food. He was a ghost in his own lifetime, a story whispered around fires, the man who mocked the spirits and was bound by their judgment. Yet still he wandered. Something in him refused to collapse fully. Pride lingered, though cracked and bleeding. He told himself again and again that he would find a way to break the curse. Somewhere in the mountains, in the caves of the ancestors, there must be a ritual to free him. If he could just tear the bone from his flesh, if he could just be whole again, perhaps the villagers would forget. Perhaps even Nyara. But every time he thought of her, the whispers surged louder, until his skull throbbed with pain. Meanwhile, in silent plains, Nyara's life shifted. Without Haroun's shadow, she was freer, though never truly free of memory. The villagers no longer looked at her as a curse. They looked at her with something approaching awe. Some brought her food not as charity but as offerings. The elders consulted her on small matters, testing whether the spirit's protection lingered with her. She answered humbly, never claiming wisdom, but each time she spoke people listened more closely. And always when the wind howled at night, she thought of Haroun wandering somewhere beyond the horizon. She did not pray for his suffering, but neither did she pray for his release. She simply let the spirits keep their judgment. In the wilderness, Haroun learned what it was to be truly alone. Not a leader, not a father, not even a man, but a vessel for his own cruelty made flesh. The skull had become his companion, his tormentor, his mirror. And so the stepfather who had once ruled with fear walked the earth as an exile, his shame carved into his body for all to see. He had wanted to brand her forever, but instead, the spirits branded him. The nights grew longer as Haroun wandered, and the skull that clung to his hands no longer contented itself with whispers. It began to speak with voices layered like smoke and fire, echoes of ancient beings who had once worn bone as a crown. The hollow sockets glowed faintly in the dark, flickering like embers buried deep in ash. At first, Haroun resisted. He shouted at the voices, cursing them, demanding silence. But the skull was patient. It waited until exhaustion pulled at his limbs, until hunger gnawed him weak, until the loneliness of exile cracked his pride like brittle clay. Then it spoke with words that crawled into the cracks of his spirit. "You are not cursed, you are chosen." He froze the first time he heard it clearly, sitting beside a dry riverbed. His body ached from thirst, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Chosen?" he rasped, his voice raw. "I'm mocked, ruined. Look at me." He raised his bound hands toward the empty stars. The skull pulsed faintly, its glow painting his face in bone-white light. "The villagers are blind. They fear what they cannot wield. But you placed a bone upon another. You dared to call upon powers forgotten. The spirits answered you because you are strong enough to bear them." Haroun shook his head violently, though his heart hammered. "No. They answered to shame me. To bind me. To bind you to us," the voices corrected. "The skull is not your prison. It is your key." From that night forward, the whispers no longer taunted, they coaxed. They spoke of hidden fires in the mountains, of caverns where ancient skulls lay piled like a secret army. They told him of kings who had once ruled not by harvests or swords but by the power of bone, by spirits bound to flesh. Haroun's desperation twisted into a new form, hunger not for freedom but for mastery. If this skull was power, then perhaps more skulls would mean dominion. He began to search the wilderness not for escape but for relics. He tore through abandoned shrines, scoured caves, and slept in burial grounds where even jackals feared to tread. The skull guided him. Its whispers grew more insistent, more commanding. "Deeper. Further. To the mountain of hollow winds. There lies the altar where your true strength waits." Each night, Haroun's dreams grew darker. He saw himself standing before silent plains, not as an exile but as a conqueror. Villagers bowed, their faces pale with fear as he raised bone-crowned hands, fire spilling from the sockets. Nyara stood among them, no longer calm and serene but trembling before him. In the dream he laughed, a laugh that shook the very earth. But always when he awoke, the laughter curdled into silence. For though the skull promised greatness, his body was breaking. His arms were raw from constant scraping, his back bent beneath the weight of exhaustion. And yet he pressed on, each step heavier than the last. Meanwhile, in silent plains, the villagers whispered of him still. Some claimed to see lights flickering on distant hills at night, as though fires burned where none should be. Hunters reported hearing strange cries in the wilderness, like a man and a beast speaking with the same voice. Mothers drew their children close, muttering prayers that the horned shadow would never return. Nyara heard these whispers, but she did not speak against them. She knew the spirits did not act without purpose. If Haroun was still walking the earth, bound to bone, then there was a reason. Yet unease stirred in her chest. Each night, she dreamt of fire climbing the horizon, and always the horns loomed at the center of the flame. For Haroun, the skull had become both tormentor and teacher. Where once it hummed with judgment, now it purred with promises. And though he still bore the villagers' scorn, he began to believe the voices more than the memory of their eyes. "They cast you out, but we will raise you higher. You are not Haroun the outcast. You are Haroun the hornbearer. You will return not as a beggar but as fire itself." And with each step deeper into the mountains he came closer to believing. The dry season deepened, and with it came whispers of Haroun's return. Hunters reported seeing smoke rising from the mountains where none should be, and shepherds swore they had glimpsed a horned figure moving among the ridges, his silhouette glowing faintly in the dark. Children woke screaming from dreams of a man whose hands burned with bone fire. In silent plains, unease spread like drought through the fields. The villagers remembered how he had left, broken, shamed, bound by the spirits. But memory is fragile when weighed against fear. Now each night the elders gathered at the fire to discuss what should be done if Haroun truly came back. Some argued for weapons, for spears and traps. Others shook their heads, saying no blade could cut bone fused by the spirits. Nyara said little, but in her silence she carried weight. She had watched the village change since Haroun's exile. People listened to her words, sought her counsel in disputes, even deferred to her judgment during the planting. Yet she did not claim leadership. She only spoke what was needed, and often she said nothing at all. But each time her eyes lifted to the horizon, the villagers saw in her face a knowing that chilled them. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills in a blaze of red, Haroun appeared. He did not come creeping like a beggar, nor stumbling as he had left. He walked upright, his body gaunt but charged with a strange vitality. His bound hands, still fused into the goat's skull, now burned with a low, steady glow. The sockets that had once been hollow now glimmered with ember light, flickering as if alive. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, and silence fell across the village like a shroud. "I have returned," Haroun said, his voice rough but commanding. "You cast me out, but the spirits never left me. They chose me, bound me, and now they have given me strength." The villagers recoiled. Some muttered prayers. Others clutched their children and stepped back. Elder Kofi stepped forward, his staff trembling in his hand. "Haroun, you left in shame. The skull was your punishment, not your crown. Do not twist judgment into pride." Haroun laughed, a deep, echoing sound that carried a vibration not wholly human. "Punishment? No. It was a trial. And I endured it. While you huddled here like frightened dogs, I walked the mountains. I heard the voices of the old ones. They gave me their fire. Look." He raised his fused hands. Flames flickered from the skull's sockets, spilling outward like breath from a furnace. The fire danced across the dust without consuming it, forming shapes, faces, horns, spirits that writhed and dissolved into smoke. Gasps filled the air. Children screamed. "Behold what you feared," Haroun thundered. "You called me cursed. Now you will call me chosen." The villagers trembled, but it was not awe, it was dread. They had lived too long under his cruelty to mistake this spectacle for blessing. Fear of spirits was strong, but memory of his hand was stronger. Nyara stepped forward then, quiet and deliberate. Her feet pressed the earth softly, her gaze never leaving his. The crowd parted to let her through. She stood in the open space, facing him as she had once faced his wrath in their hut. "You do not carry the spirits," she said softly, but her voice carried. "You are carried by them. They speak and you repeat. You believe yourself master, but you are a vessel filled with fire you cannot contain." Haroun's jaw tightened. His emberlit eyes flared. "You dare to speak to me? You who were nothing but a stain on this village. You should kneel, Nyara. You should thank me that I let you live long enough to see my return." She did not flinch. "I knelt once. Never again." The villagers held their breath. Fire pulsed around Haroun's hands, the skull glowing brighter. Sparks leapt into the air, swirling in patterns that seemed almost to form words. His voice boomed, layered with echoes not his own. "The spirits will judge," he roared, "and their fire will reveal truth." The flames surged outward, circling him like a crown, illuminating every face in the clearing. Shadows twisted, and for a moment it seemed the entire village was ablaze though no hut burned. The people cowered, but Nyara stood firm, the light etching her calm face in stark contrast to Haroun's wild, fevered one. And in that blinding glare, something stirred. The villagers began to murmur, not in fear but in recognition. For though Haroun's fire flared loud and violent, it wavered, unstable, snapping at his own flesh. But Nyara's presence, unburning, unshaken, seemed to cast its own quiet light. The fire revealed not only Haroun's power but also his corruption. His gaunt body trembled, his eyes glowed with desperation more than strength. The villagers began to see what the spirits had already judged. His fire was not mastery but bondage. Elder Amma raised her voice above the chaos. "The spirits test us all. But only one walks free of their burden." She turned her staff toward Nyara. "Look. She stands in fire's glare, unscorched. She is not the cursed one. She is the chosen." A murmur spread through the crowd, first hesitant, then swelling until the air quaked with it. "Nyara. Nyara." Haroun's face twisted in rage, his flames leaping higher, threatening to consume him. He raised his hands as if to strike, but the skull groaned, its sockets flaring, and for the first time fear crossed his face. And as the villagers closed ranks around Nyara, standing not in pity but in defiance, Haroun realized that the fire he had brought back was no longer his weapon. It was his trial, and it was slipping from his grasp. The night roared with firelight. Haroun's skull-bound hands blazed, casting long writhing shadows against the huts. Sparks flew into the dark, and the villagers scattered back, forming a wide ring around him and Nyara. The air quivered with smoke and heat. Haroun's chest heaved, every breath pulling flame through the sockets of the goat's skull. His eyes glowed with ember light, yet beneath it flickered something raw, fear, desperation, the terror of a man who had bound himself to powers he could no longer command. "You think the village will follow you?" he bellowed, voice cracking with fury. "They tremble before fire. And I am fire." He raised his fused hands, and the flames leapt skyward, spiraling into a pillar of light that painted the clouds. The villagers shielded their eyes, but Nyara did not move. Her stillness was a shield greater than any spear. "No," she said, voice clear and steady. "You are not fire. You are only the wood it feeds on. You burn because you are hollow." The words pierced sharper than any blade. Haroun staggered, his flames faltering for the briefest instant before surging back, wild, uncontrolled. He lunged forward, flame lashing like a whip, striking the ground at Nyara's feet. Dust hissed into steam, the earth blackening. But when the smoke cleared, she still stood. The fire licked close to her body but did not touch her, as though it knew its master. A hush swept the villagers. Haroun froze, his mouth opening but no words forming. For the first time since his return, the power slipped from his grasp. Nyara stepped closer, her shadow stretching long in the blaze. "The spirits gave you fire to carry. You wielded it as a weapon, but it was never yours. Fire is truth. Fire is life. It reveals what is hidden." She lifted her chin, her voice rising. "And it reveals you." As if answering her, the flames surged brighter, illuminating Haroun in searing clarity. His body was wasted, his skin cracked and blistered where the heat had gnawed at him. The skull fused to his hands glowed red, bone groaning under the strain. His eyes, once proud, now darted wildly, cornered. The villagers saw, and their fear shifted to anger. They remembered his cruelty, his beatings, the hunger he had left in his wake. And they saw now that his power was not blessing but curse. Elder Amma raised her staff. "He is judged. The spirits have spoken." A chant began, low and trembling, swelling with every voice. "Nyara! Nyara! Firebearer! Firebearer!" Haroun roared, a sound torn between rage and despair. "No. You cannot take this from me. The fire is mine." He hurled his arms forward, releasing a torrent of flame. It rushed like a storm toward Nyara. The villagers cried out, some covered their eyes, others clutched their children. But Nyara did not move. The fire struck her, and split. Like water against a stone, it parted, rushing to either side of her, leaving her untouched. The flames curled into the air and dissolved into sparks that rained harmlessly onto the ground. Gasps filled the night. Nyara lifted her hand, not fused, not bound, but free, and the flames bent toward her as though answering a silent command. They swirled around her fingers, forming a small, steady flame that burned white at its core. The villagers fell silent. Haroun fell to his knees. The goat's skull on his hands shrieked as though alive, cracks splintering through its surface. Smoke poured from the sockets, and the fire that had once obeyed him sputtered, guttered, then fled. His hands smoked, flesh charred, but no flame remained. Only silence and the stench of burned earth. Nyara looked down at him. Her flame hovered in her palm, bright but gentle, a mirror of her spirit. The village held its breath. Would she strike him down, and the man who had tormented her, who had claimed the spirits, who had brought ruin and fear? Nyara's gaze softened, not with pity, but with a depth that reached beyond vengeance. "You sought to bind fire," she said quietly. "But fire cannot be bound. It chooses where it burns. It chose me." She closed her hand, and the flame sank into her skin, leaving only a faint glow beneath. Haroun wept, shoulders shaking, the weight of emptiness crashing down. Without the fire he was only a man, frail, broken, forgotten. Nyara turned from him, her voice rising for all to hear. "The fire is no one's weapon. It is our protector. It will not be wielded by cruelty but by truth. And as long as we honor it, it will burn with us." The villagers erupted in a cry, not fear, not anger, but triumph. They surged forward, some weeping, some laughing, and gathered around Nyara. Children touched her robes, their eyes wide with wonder. Elders bowed their heads. Hunters raised their spears, not in challenge but in salute. At the edge of the clearing, Haroun crumpled into shadow, forgotten by the crowd he had once ruled through terror. And as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight mingled with the faint glow from Yara's hands. Children lit their torches from her eternal flame, carrying it from hut to hut, from field to field, until the whole village shone. They no longer called her cursed. They no longer called her outcast. She was Nyara, fire-bearer, protector of the village. And where she walked, the fire walked too.